Caleb Turner had spent the last 3 days riding across long, empty plains where the wind was his only companion. He was a quiet cowboy, the kind who did his work without complaint and spoke only when necessary. Most people remembered him not for his words, but for his gentle nature and the steady way he handled his horse. His brown hat was dusty. His boots carried the marks of long travel. And his eyes showed a calmness that came from living close to nature. He had been traveling toward a small town, but his water supply ran low after a long stretch of dry land. When he saw smoke rising in the distance, he hoped it was a settlement. As he rode closer, he recognized the patterns painted on wooden structures and the style of the huts. It was an Apache village. He slowed his horse. Not out of fear, but out of respect. Caleb had passed by a few indigenous settlements in the past and always approached with care. He believed that when visiting another land, one should show kindness first. As he entered the outer area of the village, a few children stopped their play and looked at him with wide, curious eyes. Caleb lifted his hand in a small greeting. An older man sitting near a fire nodded back at him, signaling that he was welcome. This small gesture helped Caleb relax. He dismounted his horse, stretched his tired legs, and walked forward. He asked if he could trade for water and a little food. The elders discussed quietly among themselves before inviting him to sit near them. One of the women took his water bag and walked toward the well to fill it. Caleb thanked her with a grateful smile. While waiting, he noticed two young children carrying a clay water pot together. It seemed heavy for them. They were doing their best, but just before reaching the storage area, the pot slipped from their hands and cracked on one side. The children looked frightened, not because someone would punish them, but because they were disappointed in themselves. Caleb stepped forward, squatted beside the broken pot, and inspected it. He gently spoke to them in simple words, telling them not to worry. The pot was cracked, but not shattered. Caleb had spent years fixing things on his family ranch, so he knew a trick or two. He picked up a few small sticks, some plant fiber, and gently tied the pot in a way that held it together. The children watched with amazement. When he lifted the pot again, it did not leak as before. The children clapped, laughing, and calling out to their friends. "Thank you, Cowboy," one of them said. Caleb felt a small warmth fill his chest. He was not used to such cheerful praise, but he appreciated it. The children, full of energy, began running around the village telling others, "The cowboy with a wife fixed our pot." Caleb frowned in confusion. He had no idea where the wife part had come from. Maybe one child had misunderstood something he said, or maybe they said it just for fun. He didn't think much of it at first. However, that playful sentence traveled much faster than he expected. While he waited for his supplies, Caleb noticed a group of women carrying baskets and talking softly among themselves. They would look at him, whisper something, and then laugh. He felt a little uneasy, wondering what rumor had started. It wasn't until later that he understood the cause. Among these women was Nayeli, a confident Apache woman known in the village for her sharp mind, warm heart, and bold humor. She was not the kind of person who hid behind her words. If she had something to say, she said it clearly. Nayeli was helping an elder woman sort dried herbs when she noticed Caleb. She had heard the children talking and assumed they were telling the truth. She had no reason to doubt them. She studied him for a moment. He wasn't like the men she usually met. He stood quietly, always watching his surroundings with calm eyes, as if everything held meaning. His posture showed respect, not arrogance. He listened more than he talked. Something about his presence made her curious. While the children continued laughing and running around, Nayeli overheard two of them repeating their favorite line of the day. "The cowboy has a wife. The cowboy has a wife." Nayeli raised her eyebrow and looked at Caleb again. Something didn't add up. Most married men she had seen wore a ring or carried a certain pride in their tone when speaking of their family. But Caleb didn't show that kind of behavior. He seemed like a man who traveled alone. Still, the idea stuck in her mind. If a man with a wife could be so gentle with strangers, maybe he was the kind of person who valued kindness above all. That thought made her smile. As the day went on, Caleb continued helping where he could. He held a ladder steady for an older man repairing a roof. He helped gather dry wood for a cooking fire. Even though he was tired from his travels, he did not refuse anyone who asked for help. The elders appreciated this. People who came from outside often stayed distant, but Caleb blended in without trying. Nayeli watched him several times from a distance. She noticed how he knelt down to pet a stray dog that limped slightly. She saw how he bowed his head politely when elders spoke. She even caught him giving his own food to a child who seemed hungry. Caleb didn't do it for attention. He did it because it felt right to him. The sun began to set, filling the sky with orange and soft pink colors. The village prepared for the evening meal. Caleb sat near the same quiet fire he had first approached. He expected to finish his food, rest a bit, and then leave in the morning. He had no intention of staying longer, but destiny often begins in the smallest, most unexpected moments. Nayeli finally decided to walk toward him. She had a boldness in her step, and the elders watched with small, knowing smiles. They enjoyed the entertainment unfolding before them. Caleb noticed her approaching and quickly stood up out of respect. Nayeli's eyes were bright with curiosity. She looked at him for a moment and then smiled. "So," she said in a calm but playful voice, "if you don't want your wife, I can be the second." Caleb blinked, then blinked again. His mind froze. His thoughts stumbled. "What?" he said in complete confusion. The elders who were watching lowered their heads to hide their laughter. A few children covered their mouths, trying not to giggle too loudly. Nayeli crossed her arms lightly, still smiling. She spoke slowly, thinking he might be shy. "Your wife," she repeated. "The one the children talked about. If you are unhappy with her, then maybe—" "I don't have a wife," Caleb interrupted, startled. Silence. Nayeli stared at him. The elders looked at each other. The children paused mid-laugh. Caleb slowly raised his hands as if surrendering to confusion. "Truly, I don't have a wife. Not now, not anywhere. I travel alone." The silence lasted only a second before a wave of laughter spread around them. The children threw their hands in the air and ran around repeating, "He doesn't have a wife. He doesn't have a wife." They found the entire thing even funnier now. Nayeli covered her mouth with her hand as she tried to control her laughter. Her eyes shined with amusement. She hadn't meant to embarrass him, and she hadn't expected such a misunderstanding. She finally sat down beside him, and Caleb sat too, though still confused about what had just happened. "I think," Nayeli said softly, "the children made up a story. And I believed it." Caleb rubbed the back of his neck. "I think they did." The moment was awkward, in the most harmless and funny way. Caleb, usually quiet, didn't know what to say next. Nayeli, on the other hand, seemed entirely comfortable. She laughed again, a clear and warm sound that made Caleb relax. "You must think I'm strange," she said. "No," he replied gently. "Just honest." Nayeli looked at him with interest. "You're honest too." "I can tell. I can tell." They sat near the fire while the night deepened, glowing stars slowly appearing above. The misunderstanding had broken the ice between them. What began as an innocent rumor now opened the door to a new connection neither of them had expected. And while Caleb did not yet know it, the simple act of helping children fix a pot had brought him into a story he would remember for the rest of his life. After the laughter finally softened and the evening grew calmer, Caleb and Nayeli remained seated near the warm fire. The misunderstanding had left Caleb slightly embarrassed, but it had also opened a door he never expected. People in the village continued smiling whenever they looked at him, whispering something friendly to one another, and some even winked knowingly. Caleb didn't fully understand their humor, but he could feel they held no bad intentions toward him. Nayeli sat cross-legged with her hands resting on her knees. The firelight touched her face gently, giving her features a soft glow. She watched Caleb with a curious expression, half amused, half thoughtful. For the first time in a long while, Caleb felt someone studying him not with suspicion, but with genuine interest. "You still look confused," Nayeli teased lightly. He gave a small, slow nod. She leaned forward a little, resting her elbows on her knees. It was only a joke, the children started. They like making stories. Sometimes they say something silly, and the whole village ends up repeating it. Caleb raised his eyebrows. And today I became a married man because of them. Yes. She laughed again. A sound he was beginning to enjoy hearing. And you became a husband who might need a second wife too. Caleb shook his head with a smile. That part, I still don't understand. Nayeli's face grew more serious, though her eyes stayed warm. In our culture, joke or no joke, when someone hears a stranger might be married, they try to understand what kind of man he is. But the moment I saw you helping the children, I could tell you had a good heart. That made me curious. Caleb looked down at his hands. He never thought simple kindness would make anyone notice him for anything special. I just like helping when I can. I noticed, she replied softly. Another pause formed. Not uncomfortable this time, but thoughtful. Finally, Nayeli broke the silence again, repeating her playful words, though now with a more curious tone instead of teasing. If you don't want your wife, I can be the second. This time Caleb didn't panic. He smiled gently. I still promise I don't have a wife. Then you rejected my offer for no reason, she said, pretending to look offended. Caleb chuckled softly, and Nayeli smiled at the reaction she managed to pull from him. She liked that he was beginning to relax. So, she continued, tell me something. Why does a man like you travel alone? Most people travel with family or friends, but you ride the open land without anyone beside you. Caleb hesitated. He wasn't good at speaking about himself. Still, talking to her felt strangely easy. Life took me many places. He began slowly. I grew up on a ranch with my family. I worked there since I was young. But after some years, things changed. My parents grew older, the ranch didn't need as many hands, and I felt like I needed to see more of the world. So I left. Nayeli listened without interrupting. She watched him in a way that made him feel she truly cared about his words. Did you ever think of staying in one place again? She asked. I think about it, Caleb admitted, but I've never found the right place. Nayeli nodded as if she understood something important. Sometimes people travel far, searching for a feeling they cannot name. Sometimes, that feeling is simply belonging. Caleb looked at her. Her words hit something deep inside him. Belonging, yes. That was something he had silently been searching for. A place where he didn't feel like a visitor, a passerby, or a stranger. A place where people saw him as more than a traveler. What about you? He asked gently. Have you lived here your whole life? Yes, she said with a proud but calm tone. My people have lived on this land for generations. We grow up learning stories, traditions, and responsibilities. It is a life full of meaning, but sometimes... She paused and looked toward the distant hills. Sometimes I wonder what is beyond the mountains. I wonder what other people see when they look at the world. I wonder how big the sky feels in places I have never been. Caleb smiled. Sounds like you want to explore. Maybe, she admitted with a shrug. Or maybe I simply enjoy listening to travelers like you. Your stories bring pieces of the world to our village. Then I should tell you a few, Caleb said, surprising himself with his own eagerness. Nayeli nodded, leaning slightly closer. I would like that. So he did. Caleb began sharing simple stories, nothing dramatic or loud. He told her about the time he followed a wild horse for 3 days just to help it out of a ravine. He told her about a lake he once found that was so calm it reflected the sky like a mirror. He described the stars he saw when he slept out in the open land. Stars so clear they looked close enough to touch. As he spoke, Nayeli's eyes stayed fixed on him, absorbing every detail as if each sentence was a gift. Caleb wasn't used to someone listening so closely. Most people in towns only cared about trading, working, or gossiping. But Nayeli listened with her whole presence, and it made Caleb feel like his words mattered. When he finished one story, she asked another question. Do you ever feel lonely when you sleep under the open sky? Sometimes, Caleb admitted. But I think everyone feels lonely at some point. The sky is big. The land is wide. When the night is quiet, it reminds you how small you are. Nayeli's expression softened. Maybe that is why people need each other. To feel a little less small. Caleb nodded slowly. He had never thought of it that way. But her words made sense. For a long moment, they sat quietly. The fire crackled softly. The people around them began preparing to rest. Children were tucked into warm blankets, and the elders whispered prayers for the night. The stars above grew brighter. Nayeli broke the silence first. You said earlier you don't have a wife. I don't, he confirmed with a small smile. And you are not traveling to meet one? No, he said honestly. I'm not searching for anything like that. Not even a little? She asked teasingly. Caleb felt a warmth rise in his cheeks, but he answered sincerely. I never stayed anywhere long enough to think about it. Nayeli looked at him thoughtfully. Maybe you never stayed because you never met someone who made you want to. Caleb's heart gave a small, uncomfortable, yet warm jump. He didn't know how to reply to that. He didn't want to misunderstand her meaning. Not after the earlier confusion. But her eyes held no joke now, only curiosity and sincerity. He lowered his gaze. Maybe, she smiled, a soft and knowing smile. I told you earlier I could be the second wife. But now I know I was wrong. Caleb frowned lightly. Wrong? Yes. Nayeli touched her hand to her chest. If I ever decide to be someone's wife, I would rather be the first. He looked at her in surprise. It wasn't an offer. It wasn't a proposal. It was simply a truth she shared. And it revealed a quiet strength in her. She was not someone who accepted a lesser place in someone's life. Caleb respected that deeply. I think you deserve that, he said gently. She tilted her head slightly. And what about you? What do you deserve? Caleb thought for a long moment. I don't think much about what I deserve. I just hope to find a place where I can be useful. A place where I can be accepted. Nayeli's eyes softened again. I think you underestimate yourself, Caleb Turner. He smiled a little at the sound of his full name on her lips. And how would you judge me so quickly? Because I watched you today, she said. You treated our children with kindness. You respected our elders. You helped without being asked. That tells me more about a man than his words ever could. Caleb met her gaze. He felt a strange mix of gratitude and modest embarrassment. Not many people see those things. 5. Complicating drive. Complicating drive. Caleb met her gaze. Consider. I see them, she said simply. The fire crackled again. A cool breeze passed through the village, carrying the scent of night flowers blooming near the river. It made the air feel calm and peaceful. For the first time since he arrived, Caleb felt at ease, as if he belonged in that moment exactly where he sat. Nayeli stood up slowly, brushing dust from her clothing. I should rest now. Tomorrow will be a busy day. But before I go, I want to ask one more question. Caleb stood as well. Go ahead. Now that you know the truth about the joke, if someone asks you whether you want a wife someday, what will you say? Caleb hesitated, then answered with quiet honesty. I will say, maybe someday. If I meet the right person. Nayeli smiled, her eyes shimmering in the firelight. That is a good answer. She turned to walk away but stopped after a few steps. Without looking back, she said, and who knows? Maybe the right person is closer than you think. Caleb watched her walk toward her home, her silhouette glowing softly under the moonlight. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring. He didn't know if he would stay or continue his journey, but one thing had become clear. This woman, with her bold humor and deep understanding, had entered his life with one simple sentence, and somehow, without meaning to, she had already changed the direction of his thoughts. The misunderstanding was no longer just a joke. It was the beginning of a connection that neither of them fully understood yet, but both felt in their hearts. The next morning began with soft sunlight spreading across the village, touching the roofs, the fields, and the quiet pathways. The night rain had left the ground wet, and small puddles reflected the bright sky like tiny mirrors. Caleb woke early, as he always did, expecting to prepare his horse and continue his journey. But when he stepped outside, he noticed the paths were muddy and slippery. The elders were already discussing that no one should travel until the ground dried, because the roads were unsafe for long riding. Caleb realized this meant he had to stay at least one more day, maybe even two. Instead of feeling restless, he felt strangely calm, as if fate had gently placed a hand on his shoulder and told him to slow down. He wasn't sure whether the feeling came from the peaceful village or from the memory of Nayeli's quiet smile the night before. While he was checking his horse, one of the elders approached him with a small basket. "You helped us yesterday," the elder said kindly. "Today, let us give you something to eat." Inside the basket were warm pieces of bread, dried fruit, and a cup of herbal tea. Caleb accepted it with gratitude. As he sat down to eat, he noticed Nayeli walking toward the river with a bundle of clothes. She looked different in the gentle sunlight, less playful and more peaceful. She didn't see him at first. Caleb watched her quietly, admiring the calm way she moved. She walked like someone who carried responsibilities with grace. After he finished eating, Caleb offered to help the older men chop some wood. Even though the ground was muddy, he worked carefully, splitting pieces of firewood while a group of children sat nearby, watching him with the same excitement they had shown yesterday. They whispered things like, "Look, the strong cowboy is helping again. And maybe he will fix something else today." Caleb smiled at their enthusiasm. He didn't mind their attention. In fact, their presence made him feel lighter. A little later, Nayeli returned from the river carrying wet clothes in a basket. When she saw Caleb chopping wood, she stopped for a moment, then walked toward him. "You work more than some of our own men," she said with a soft laugh. Caleb pushed his hat back and grinned slightly. "I just like keeping busy." "You could rest," she suggested. "I will," he replied, after helping a little more. She watched him for a moment, noticing the quiet determination in his movements. "My people appreciate men who help others," she said gently. "But you don't have to prove anything." "I know," Caleb said. "I do this because it feels right." Nayeli nodded slowly. Something about his answer touched her. While the elders continued their tasks, Caleb and Nayeli found themselves working near each other in the village center. She sorted herbs and prepared food, while he fixed small tools and repaired another cracked pot for one of the families. It surprised her how easily he learned the village's ways, how naturally he fit into the rhythm of their daily life. After a while, Nayeli asked him, "Do you help this much everywhere you go?" "Not everywhere," he said honestly. "But here, it feels like the right place to help." "Why here?" she asked softly. Caleb hesitated, and then answered with equal softness. "Because the people here make me feel welcome." Nayeli didn't respond immediately. She looked down at her hands, pretending to focus on her work even though her thoughts were far away. She knew he wasn't simply talking about the elders or the children. She felt something warm inside her, something she didn't want to name too quickly. As the day continued, a gentle rain began to fall again, not heavy, just soft drops that made the air smell fresh. Everyone hurried to cover their work areas. Nayeli grabbed a blanket from a bench, but the wind caught one corner and nearly carried it away. Caleb reached out just in time, catching it for her. They both grabbed the same corner at the same moment. Their hands touched for a brief second. It was a small touch, but it felt meaningful. Nayeli looked up at him with surprise, and Caleb quickly let go, feeling a shy warmth rise in his face. "Thank you," she said quietly. "You're welcome," he replied, clearing his throat and looking away. When the rain stopped, the village children began playing again. They ran around, jumping in puddles and laughing. One of the younger boys tugged at Caleb's shirt. "Come play with us," he said brightly. Caleb laughed. "I'm a bit old for that." "No, you're not," the boy insisted. Nayeli crossed her arms and smiled. "Go on," she teased. "I want to see if the great cowboy can jump over puddles without falling." Caleb tried to look serious, but he couldn't hide his smile. He joined the children, carefully hopping from one dry spot to another. The kids cheered when he managed a particularly long jump. Nayeli watched from the side, laughing softly each time he nearly slipped. Seeing him play made her heart feel light. It wasn't common for strangers to join village games so freely. Caleb didn't act like he was above anyone. He didn't hold himself apart. He simply blended in naturally, as if he had always belonged there. Later in the afternoon, when most people were resting, Nayeli invited Caleb to walk with her near the river. The air was cool, and the sky was filled with drifting clouds. The river moved slowly, its surface shining like silver. They walked quietly for a while. Caleb looked at the water and said, "This place is peaceful." "It is," Nayeli agreed. "Many people come here when they need to think." He glanced at her. "Is that why you brought me here?" She smiled a little. "Maybe. Or maybe I just enjoy your company." The honesty of her words made Caleb's heart beat slightly faster. He tried to keep his voice steady. "I enjoy yours too." Nayeli knelt near the water and touched the surface with her fingertips. "When I was young," she said, "I used to come here every day. I believed the river carried dreams. I used to tell it my hopes. Sometimes, I still do." "What do you hope for now?" Caleb asked gently. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she pulled a small leaf from a nearby plant, placed it on the water, and watched it float away. "I hope," she said softly, "for a future where I am not standing still. A future where I grow, learn, and meet new things. Maybe new people." Caleb understood what she meant. "You're not standing still," he said quietly. "You're doing more than you think." She looked at him with thoughtful eyes. "And what about you? What do you hope for, Caleb?" He took a slow breath, watching the water drift. "I hope," he began carefully, "to find a place where I can stay. A place where I feel needed. A place where I feel connected." Nayeli's eyes softened. "Maybe that place is not as far away as you imagine." There was a calm silence between them, the kind that doesn't need to be filled with words. The sound of flowing water, the distant voices of children, and the breath of wind through the leaves created a peaceful moment. After a while, they returned to the village. The elders were preparing an evening gathering, and everyone was invited to sit around the main fire. As the sun set, warm orange light filled the village once more. People shared stories, jokes, and memories. Even Caleb was encouraged to speak. One of the elders asked him, "What brings you here, traveler? And what keeps you here?" Caleb smiled shyly. "I came here by chance, but I stayed because I felt welcome." The villagers nodded approvingly. Nayeli sat beside him, listening quietly. Whenever their eyes met, they shared a small smile, one filled with a growing understanding neither of them had expected. Later in the evening, as the stars appeared, Nayeli offered Caleb a cup of warm herbal tea. Their fingers brushed again when he took it. And this time, neither of them pulled away quickly. It was a gentle moment, a quiet sign that something new was forming between them. As the night deepened and the village settled down, Caleb walked slowly to the place where he slept. He paused halfway, looking back toward the fire, where he could still see Nayeli speaking with her friends. At that moment, he realized something surprising and comforting. Staying one more day did not bother him at all. In fact, he hoped the roads would stay muddy a little longer, because each hour he spent here made him feel closer to something he hadn't felt in years, a growing sense of belonging. And much of that feeling came from a woman who had first approached him with a bold joke, but now stood quietly in a corner of his heart. Taylor woke up early the next morning with a strange mix of excitement and confusion in his heart. The quiet sounds of the desert morning filled the air, soft wind touching the sand, faraway birds calling, and the gentle crackle of a small fire someone had started before sunrise. For a moment, he stayed still, thinking about everything that had happened since he first met Ayana. He had come to this land with a simple purpose, but he had found something he never expected. A connection that gently grew without noise or pressure. Ayana was not far. She was sitting near the fire, holding a pot of warm tea made from desert herbs. When she noticed him, she smiled softly. A smile that carried calmness instead of expectation. Taylor joined her, and for a while, they didn't speak. They didn't need to. The silence between them had become comfortable and meaningful. When they finally talked, it was about simple things at first. The weather, the animals in the area, the work they planned to finish in the village. But slowly, the conversation turned toward something deeper. Ayana asked him what he wanted in life. He took a moment to think before he answered. He told her that he wanted a peaceful life, meaningful friendships, and work that felt honest. She nodded, listening to every word like it mattered. Then she shared her own thoughts. She said she wanted to help her people, to keep their traditions alive, but also to understand the outside world more. She said she believed that understanding could help bring harmony. Her honesty touched him because she wasn't trying to impress him. She was speaking from her heart. Later that day, they went back to the village, where work still needed to be done. Taylor helped the men repair a small shed damaged by a storm, while Ayana worked with the women preparing food for a community gathering. Everyone in the village was in a pleasant mood, and there was a gentle feeling of unity in the air. The children laughed as they played, and the elders shared stories while watching the preparations. When evening came, the villagers gathered for a small celebration to thank Taylor for his help. It wasn't a loud or big event, but a warm, sincere one. Someone played a simple drum, and others sang an old song that carried a gentle rhythm. Ayana invited Taylor to join the gathering, and he felt honored to sit with them, even though he came from a very different place. The villagers welcomed him with respect and kindness. One of the elders thanked him for showing goodwill and hard work. Taylor responded humbly, saying he felt grateful to be among them. The night sky above was filled with stars, bright and endless, creating a peaceful backdrop to the gathering. As the night continued, Ayana sat beside him. She didn't speak much, but her presence felt comforting. Taylor realized how naturally she had become an important part of his journey. She wasn't someone who pushed her wishes on him. She wasn't trying to force a future on him. Instead, she stood beside him as a friend, someone who understood him without needing many words. Later, when the celebration ended and the fire slowly dimmed, Ayana walked with Taylor away from the crowd. The village was quiet, and the moonlight made everything look calm and soft. They walked slowly, without rushing, as if both wanted the moment to last longer. Finally, Ayana stopped walking and looked at him gently. She apologized again for the misunderstanding she had caused earlier, the moment when she had jokingly said she could be his second wife if his first one did not want him. Taylor laughed softly, remembering the confusion of that moment. He told her he wasn't upset. In fact, that moment was what made them start talking seriously. Ayana seemed relieved. She told him that she had spoken those words lightly, never imagining it would become such a story. But she admitted that she admired him because he carried respect in his actions. Taylor felt his heart warm at her sincerity. He told her she had taught him just as much about calmness, courage, and kindness. They sat on a rock under a large tree, where the soft desert breeze made the branches whisper. They talked about the future, but not in a rushed way. They simply shared possibilities. Taylor told her he would soon return to his own town for some time, but he didn't want to lose what they had built between them. Ayana said she would like to stay connected, no matter what distance came. There was no dramatic promise, no sudden declaration, just two people understanding each other deeply. And sometimes, that is more meaningful than any big words. The next day, Taylor prepared to leave. The villagers gathered to say goodbye. Some gave him small gifts, handmade items, dried fruit for the journey, or simple blessings. Ayana brought him a small woven bracelet, made with colors that represented friendship and strength. She tied it around his wrist carefully, her hands steady but full of emotion. Taylor looked at her and promised quietly that he would return. She nodded, trusting his words without questioning them. Their bond didn't need guarantees. It was built on respect and honesty. As he rode away on his horse, he kept looking back until the village slowly disappeared from sight. The bracelet on his wrist felt like a gentle reminder of everything he had experienced: the warmth of the people, the quiet beauty of the land, and the unexpected connection that grew between him and Ayana. On his journey home, Taylor replayed every moment in his mind. The misunderstanding that had started everything now felt like a blessing in disguise. He realized that life sometimes brings surprising turns, leading people into moments they never expected. When he finally reached his own town, he felt changed, not in a dramatic way, but in a stronger, calmer way. His days continued with work and routine, but there was always a thought of Ayanna in the back of his mind. The memory of the village gave him strength during difficult days and peace during quiet ones. Weeks later, he wrote a letter to Ayanna, telling her about his return, sharing stories from his town, and asking how things were going in her village. When her reply arrived, he felt a happiness he hadn't felt in a long time. Her letter was full of warmth, small stories about her people, and simple wishes for his well-being. Their friendship continued to grow through letters, respect, and memories. And even though distance separated them, their connection remained strong because it was built on sincerity, not expectations. In time, Taylor returned to the village again, this time not as a stranger, but as someone who belonged in their circle. Ayanna greeted him with the same gentle smile that had first made him feel welcome, and as they walked side by side through the familiar paths, the story that began with a misunderstood sentence grew into a bond built on trust, understanding, and quiet companionship. Their journey didn't need dramatic endings. It was enough that they found something rare and real, something that started with surprise, grew with kindness, and continued with respect, and that was the true beauty of their story.